This is John William Kraft. His birth date is August 8th, 1964. He served in the U.S. Air Force and attained the rank of Lieutenant Colonel. This recording is taking place in Davis, California on December 3rd, 2010. My name is Parker Fritch. My relationship to Mr. Kraft is that I have had him as a substitute teacher on multiple occasions. This interview is being conducted for the Veterans History Project at the Library of Congress. Mr. Kraft, I'd like to begin by asking you, why did you join the Air Force?
Why? I really wanted to fly planes, and I had wanted to do that since before I can remember. And I knew that that was a good way to do it. Get the best education I could and get the most professional flight training I could get.
Could you explain anything about that training? Like, what was the basic training that you had to go through?
Sure. In the Air Force, in fact in all the military services, in order to be a pilot you need a certain amount of basic education outside of pilot training. And for the Air Force, that's a 4-year college degree. You major in anything. They weren't really too concerned about what your field of study was, but they wanted to make sure that you had that kind of professional education basis under your belt in order to complete your flight training. Flight training program actually emulated college in a lot of ways. We had a lot of homework to do, a lot of studying, a lot of late nights and early mornings. The difference, obviously, between regular college and flight school is, in flight school, your desk is your jet. You get to take it up to Mach 1 or whatever and 30,000 feet and do barrel rolls in your desk. So that was a really exciting way, post-college, to get to enter my adult life.
Sounds like it. Kind of on a side note, what's the highest G-force that you've ever experienced, to your knowledge?
Actually, I do know, and it's because I'm a member of the 9G Club, which is it's a formal designation given to people that have flown the F-16 Fighting Falcon. And I was not a certified F-16 pilot. That was not my specialty as a pilot. I was a transport pilot. But I did get a chance to fly in the back seat of one once, so that was pretty high speed and intense.
Sounds.
Out of curiosity, did you have any civilian flight training before the Air Force, or?
Not exactly, although I was a cadet at the Air Force Academy. That's where I went to college. And during those 4 years, prior to graduating, I went down to our local, they call it an Aero Club, and that's a place where you can go ahead and fly in civilian planes, like little single-engine Cessnas, like most towns have if they have an airport. And so I got a few hours under my belt there, ended up getting a private pilot license through the civilian way of doing it before I went off to the Air Force military pilot training after I graduated.
So, being a transport pilot, do you need any kind of specialized training, different than what you would normally need just joining the Air Force?
Well, the nice thing about the Air Force and all the military pilot training schools is that all pilots get the same sort of training through most of a whole year, and then the different service branches will track you out, they call it. Some pilots will be designated to fly heavy jets, transports, bombers. Some will fly fighters, and still others will fly rotary wing, so helicopters. Even in the Air Force, they have helicopter pilots in the Air Force too. So mostly the Army that does that. Does the strange multi-moving part aviation.
Do you get to choose your own specialty?
You do in a limited way. Everybody gets to fill out what they call a dream sheet, but as they always hammer home to us, the needs of the Air Force come first. So in my particular pilot training class, a lot of us wanted to fly fighters. I wasn't so sure by the end of my pilot training year. Actually, it was a little over a year where I went to jet school, and I understood that there were very few fighter planes left for my class, and I really wanted to see the world. So my actual first choice was to fly jet transports, and that's what I did right out here in California at Travis Air Force Base.
So
where exactly around the world did you get to travel flying transport planes?
Well, to give you a timeline, that was 1986 when I started pilot training. Graduated in 1987, so that particular program was in Texas at Shepherd Air Force Base. And the cool thing about that was it was what was called a Euro-NATO Joint Jet Pilot Training Base. And it meant that I was one of maybe 8 Americans in my class of about 20, and the rest of the students were from other NATO nations. So we had a couple students from England and a couple from the Netherlands, a couple from Germany, and some other countries all around. So it's pretty cool. That was graduating in '88. In fact, it's funny. I looked at a gift that my parents had given me. It was engraved, and it was graduation date was September 11th, 1988. So it was pretty wild to see. That was obviously a big infamous date in American history now. Anyway, after graduating, I went on to fly the C-141 transport, 4-engine jet transport, pretty big plane. And I did that right down the road here in Northern California at Travis Air Force Base. It was an intercontinental transport plane. That means it could go for hours and hours and thousands of miles without ever landing. We also aerial refueled in the plane. So we would actually pull up behind a tanker jet, and he'd extend a boom down into the nose of our plane, and we'd get all the gas we need. We could stay up indefinitely. With that plane, I got to fly literally around the world several times. I've been on every continent on Earth. I've even landed on the ice in Antarctica, taking scientists down and penguins up. Pretty cool.
Did you need any specific training for being the travel jet that you were in, or was it all covered in your training?
No, the basic pilot training for everybody is just that. It's the basics of flying, how to control an airplane, how to understand things that might go wrong with your plane, and how to properly respond to them and safely recover your plane. When you find out what kind of actual function you're going to serve as an Air Force pilot in real life and with a real job, then you go on to a specialized training. So for the C-141, for most of the large transport planes at the time, back in the 80s, we all went to Altus Air Force Base in Oklahoma. And that was really a very good deal, because even though I was in my early 20s, there's absolutely nothing to do out in the middle of Oklahoma except study and learn how to fly your airplane. So it's kind of a blessing in disguise. But the things you learn there are how to not just fly technically a new kind of plane with your hands and feet, but probably at least as important, you learned how to understand complex systems and how they interact with each other, and then above all, how to interact with the other human elements on your plane. Because on that plane, and on any large plane like that, you have a crew of at least 3 guys. Well, at the time it was at least 3 guys. A lot of stuff's become automated to where you just have a pilot and a co-pilot now. But back in those days, I love how I get to say that, we would have a pilot and a co-pilot and a flight engineer, which was an enlisted guy or gal who was in charge of controlling all the systems on the plane. So balancing the fuel, making sure the oxygen was flowing correctly, making sure the engines were getting the right gas and oil, that sort of thing. We also had a person called a loadmaster, and their specialty was to make sure that all the cargo got onto the plane correctly on the ground, make sure that it got secured to the floor of the plane correctly, and it didn't move around while we're in flight, and then make sure it gets off correctly. So it was a good team effort to make that plane do what it needed to do, and the basic training for the plane was how to make sure we all got along as a team to pull that off.
Were you only the pilot, or did you operate any of the other jobs?
Well, everybody that goes through a certain basic course, that is the field that they go into in the plane. So in other words, I went through pilot training, so I started as a co-pilot in that plane. And then after a few years learning the ropes and understanding more about the plane physically and how to work with your crew, then I moved over into the left seat. In the military world, we call it a co-pilot and a pilot, or in the civilian world, first officer and a captain. So the loadmasters, that's their specialty, so they actually don't have to have a college degree to do that career field. They go right out of high school into a loadmaster training program. Flight engineers similar in that they don't have to go to college first, but the flight engineers also had to have done some other sort of career field, usually involved with the flight line with the airplane. So a lot of them were maintenance crew on airplanes on the ground before they got into the flight engineer business.
What exactly is the difference between the duties of a co-pilot versus a pilot?